All right, namaste, my friends. Welcome to Jack Colley's Black Book. Today we keep talking about Adam and Eve, and in the last episode I had suggested that there are some interesting things to consider when considering Adam and Eve as human or simply the first conscious beings. I made the argument that perhaps Adam and Eve should not be considered the first humans, simply because of their lack of experience. They did not experience human birth. We cannot say that they were the products of a male and a female human. They did not have the birthing experience. They did not have the experience of learning to negotiate, learning to work with their first gods, which is the parents, the mom, the dad, or the caregiver. We kind of jokingly said, did Adam and Eve even have navels? They certainly didn't need them. They also didn't have the experience of being a teenager, being a child, being a toddler, all of these things that typically shape us and mold us into who we are today. And so a part of me is inclined to look at Adam and Eve as the first conscious beings who were able to make decisions and not necessarily human beings, because they didn't necessarily have all the experiences that may have molded and shaped them to be quite different than what we engage in the traditional story of Adam and Eve. So I want to start with this idea that Adam and Eve were perhaps not fully human, but they were certainly conscious. They were certainly aware and living above the water. They could make a choice. And one of the first choices they made was they chose to eat of the fruit, to have their eyes open. They chose, in effect, to be fully conscious of the reality of their existence, the reality that they're in a Garden of Eden, and yet there is a serpent. So they were the first beings, if you will, to usher in a sort of consciousness where one has a choice, as opposed to animals and as opposed to the decision-making that we just don't see necessarily in animals, at least not to the level that we see in humans. So to maybe better understand this, I want to start with these two ideas. So on the left of the screen, the little black box up there, that is supposed to be, now I don't know Hebrew and I don't know, the Hindu symbols, but that is supposed to be the symbol for Yahweh. And then on the right-hand side is the symbol for Om, which is the chanting or the meditation that sometimes you hear, Om, which is kind of that focusing on the breath, focusing on the vibration in the face. But the idea behind these two Christian and Hindu traditions is that there is something out there that is beyond our understanding and beyond our capability to understand, and yet we experience these things every day. So the idea of Yahweh being a breath, that's starting to come up. I'm seeing that on social media, little videos about Yahweh being breathing and breath. And the idea of Brahman being the flow of life, something that we know we are flowing in, but we have difficulty comprehending and fully understanding. Both of these, again, being this idea that as soon as we personify them in any way, shape, or form, we have in effect destroyed them. That's what the Hindus would teach about Brahman, is that as soon as we name something God, it's no longer God. As soon as we name something Yahweh, it's no longer Yahweh, because these are concepts that envelop us that we cannot fully understand. So I've been toying around, chewing on this idea that perhaps that was the first sin. So if I define sin as being an inability to fully understand and fully appreciate that by which we engage something, if I interpret that as sin, something lacking, in other words, if we don't do something with perfection, we're somehow sinning, we find an interesting act, if you will, that I'm not sure that Christianity or Hinduism, I'm not sure to what extent these have been defined. I'm sure somebody else has thought about this. But what is it to take these incredible concepts and ideas that we sense exist and are real and to trap them in the space and time continuum? I want to suggest that perhaps we limit the idea of sin to Adam and Eve eating the fruit, when in reality, if they are not the first humans, I'm not too sure that we can consider that some sort of original sin. Perhaps the original sin was the idea of the vastness of God, the vastness of Brahman, coming to this idea that we are now going to try to insert ourselves in this space-time continuum. And we are going to give these beings, angelic beings, human beings, this very limited understanding of what really is, which in essence does produce a search, I think, within all of us. It creates this search. And so as I kind of toy around with this idea that maybe the first limitation put on our understanding of Yahweh or Brahman or any of these concepts and ideas that there's something so much greater out there than ourselves, maybe it started with some sort of conscious being, or maybe these are stories that just help our understanding of saying, you know what, in order to pass this idea on, we need to allow individuals and beings to exist in a space-time continuum. And so when we get to Adam and Eve, I didn't want to go there quite yet, so I'm just going to keep this up here. And so when we get to Adam and Eve and this idea of original sin, it's almost like this next stage in helping us understand our need to tap into this breath, to tap into Yahweh. And I wonder to what extent, as full human beings, we can be held accountable to what we consider the sin of the first beings, which is Adam and Eve. So with Adam and Eve, we have two beings, not necessarily human, but we have two beings who did come from two other beings. One being we're going to call Yahweh or Brahman, and we really shouldn't even call it a being, but two experiences. And then we have kind of the female, the feminine part of it, which is Mother Earth, giving form to Adam and Eve. So who were Adam and Eve's parents? Well, Adam and Eve's parents, so to speak, were Mother Earth. You look at the story of God forming Adam out of the soil, forming Eve from the rib of Adam. You look at all the symbolism there. So one of the parents is Mother Earth, and the other parent is this idea of God. But it's not the God that we think of. It's the Brahman or the breath, the Yahweh, the flow. And these are the parents of Adam and Eve. So Adam and Eve are created with this ability to choose, this free will, and they do indeed, according to the story, they choose the fruit, and they become fully aware of the gap between Yahweh, Brahman, and themselves. They become aware of their limitations. They figuratively are, they put on fig leaves. They're embarrassed. They want to hide this new vulnerability which they chose somehow. And we're going to continue looking at this idea in the next episode, which is going to look at Cain and Abel. And one of the things I'm going to suggest in the next episode, there's where I want to put the slide. One of the things I'm going to suggest is that maybe it was Cain and Abel's first sin, which was an act of murder. And I have a lot of different ideas in focusing around violence and murder that I hope to kind of investigate. But Cain and Abel were the first human beings. They were the first to truly experience birth, truly experience having human parents. They were, in effect, the first to truly inherit a sinful nature, if you will. I want to be careful how I use that word, but they were the first to come by a sinful nature naturally. They were the first to really be, in a sense, victims of their birth. I mean, something they didn't have a choice in. And you can see I'm having trouble kind of articulating how I want to present this, but hopefully this at least gives an impression of where I want to go with this, that the first act of violence between two truly human beings was actually an act of murder. And we're going to investigate that more. All right. Namaste, my friends. See you the next time.